Hello and welcome to today's NC Realtors Mobile Monday. My name is Seth Palmer, and I am the Director of Regulatory Affairs and External Communications here at NC Realtors. I'll be here to walk you through advocacy in the time of COVID-19, or also known as advocacy in a time of crisis. So, as you will see, I am not in my office. I am at my house. I am also in need of a haircut, which is certainly something that we all are dealing with across the state. And that certainly changed a lot of how we do advocacy and how we engage in general. So, but what I want to first start in saying is that as the North Carolina Association of Realtors, as realtors in general, we are extremely fortunate to have an awesome group of members, 48,000 strong across the state, as well as being part of 1.4 million realtors across the country. And because of that, y'all provide us as your staff, as your advocates, a huge amount of resources and tools and engagement opportunities that we're able to understand. And so it gives us as your team the ability to connect at all levels of government from across the state and across the country. There are over 530 municipalities, there's 100 counties, and there's only a staff of about 10 of us. So that makes things a little more difficult, not just during this time, but also during during normal times. We struggle, and we're very fortunate to have a growing advocacy team and engagement opportunities that are provided from the membership. So as we talk today, I'll continually reference the great work that we've been able to conduct through our growing advocacy team, whether it be regional and local government affairs directors, some of whom you probably all know very personally. They're at your associations, folks like Nick Scarsey, like Troy Bachman, like Mike Buttram, like Stephen Bradford, like Porter Graham, like Kathy Wood, like Densey Sang Sullivan, like Jordan Forrest, and the list goes on and on and on. They are all working on your behalf day in and day out in local communities and supporting us at the state level. So let's talk a little bit about how things have changed. Not to belabor any specific part of that, because we know that most everything has changed. But first and foremost, when we think about how we're communicating in this current crisis, we recognize that nobody had any form of playbook or any understanding of what the circumstances would look like. In North Carolina, we have had the opportunity to respond to crises primarily of a natural disaster means, and so we were comfortable in understanding how to communicate after a hurricane, after a tornado, after other natural disasters that we certainly knew were coming, understood kind of how things had worked previously, and then were able to engage certain communications tools, certain engagement tools, and to be able to provide the most information possible. But what we also knew through that experience is that those tended to only affect a very limited scope of the association and of the population of the state as a whole. With COVID-19, everybody's affected. All 100 counties are affected in some way. All 535 plus municipalities are affected. And in the state government and state infrastructure is affected. And so in our response, we have to be understanding of that and know that there's not this bevy of resources, this bevy of understanding as to how we communicate. And so from the NC Realtors perspective, that's why we shifted to a communicate early, communicate often, and communicate always type of mindset. And so that's why you saw us very quickly turn on the status update email and the coronavirus advocacy page located at ncrealtors.org/coronavirus. I'll post a bunch of links in the bottom of this as well as in the Mobile Mondays page. But we created all these resources because we knew that the amount of information that was flowing out from government entities, from private entities, was so voluminous for our members that we really wanted to make sure that what realtors across the state were hearing was a consistent message from the state association. We didn't want y'all to have to wait and rely on whatever you hear on the news or whatever your friends are hearing from the news or from other people for your news. That's not why you're a member of NC Realtors. We're here to assist you in that, and especially now to provide you resources so that you can understand how you can do your business if your area was, say, open during a stay-at-home order, or if it wasn't, what you can't do. Because at the end of the day, we didn't want anybody to be found and to be the front page news of trying to conduct what was their business 2 days before the order was put in, but what was then deemed to be non-essential. And those were certainly some really hard conversations, and we were extremely appreciative of many of the members across the state, including some of you who I've seen pop up as joining us today, for providing us that insight and that information, because these local orders vary. They were all over the place. Some localities and counties put out similar orders, but others just frankly kind of put out whatever they felt was important in their area, and that made it very complicated for analysis, and certainly extremely complicated for each of you on the ground, because we weren't able to give you immediate understanding, because we had to call, we had to email, we had to reach out to local attorneys, to the county commissions, through our local GADs and through folks on the ground to really understand, frankly, what the heck they meant in some ways. And we've been very fortunate through a lot of that work that we were able to roll back some of the more stringent regulations, like what you saw in Guilford and Buncombe counties, as well as in Durham and also a little bit in Mecklenburg County. All of those were a result of our advocacy efforts, but they were a very different advocacy effort than what they would have been had we been all able to go to meetings and stand face to face with county leaders and city leaders and say, hey, what is this? What's the rationale? What's the concern? What's the challenge? And so we had to do it through email, through text, through messaging, and that certainly comes with its own challenges and delays. We've also all, and this is not necessarily one of those, but it's something very similar, we've also all been on Zoom calls and WebExes and GoToMeetings all day, every day, it feels like. I think, as I've jokingly said to many folks, if I had known what we were getting into, we would have all been buying Zoom stock and other platforms that support this, because this is what everybody does. And government's not different in that. But that makes it a lot different advocacy activity for a lobbyist. I mean, as a lobbyist of almost 11 years, I'm used to going and sitting in a room with somebody, or being able to grab them in the hall and talk about an issue, even though I still may be having communications with them through email, text, and phone calls. I still have that opportunity to have that personal connection, and they know who I am and what I stand for. And as NC Realtors, we've been extremely fortunate over the decades that we've done advocacy to build long-standing relationships, so there's no newness feeling here. And especially now that we're a year into a legislative biennium, a lot of the legislators of the General Assembly knew us. There was no disconnect of, who the heck is this Seth Palmer who's emailing me? What does he want? There was connection, and that's also through the power of the NC Realtors lobbying team led by Chief Lobbyist Katie Thomas, as her team has built those relationships, not just in the past year, but over the past years and decades, that they have each walked the General Assembly halls on their own representing clients. And so they had the opportunity to build those relationships and be able to pick up the phone very quickly and get quick answers. But when we think of how your engagement, your business will change, that still is certainly an open question. As you've seen, we've shifted a lot of our meetings in the coming months, including the NC Realtors legislative meetings and the NAR Realtor legislative meetings, to virtual presence. And there's certainly huge opportunities through that. That allows for a greater degree of connection. You don't have to travel to Washington or to Raleigh to sit down face to face, essentially, with your legislators and have conversations and hear what they're talking about, and in a very candid way, because these are realtor focused events, to have that engagement. And we've seen through, as you probably have gotten in email over the past few days, with the launch of the NC Realtors virtual town halls for congressional members, we've seen a huge number of growth in our legislative meeting opportunities. We've seen people who probably have never been able to travel to Washington, D.C. for the legislative meetings because they had their business to continue and their families that they needed to stay with. But we've been able to provide an opportunity where they can engage. This afternoon in about 45 minutes, we'll host our first one with Congressman David Price. And there's about 50 people signed up for that. And that's more than we've ever had attend a single meeting with a congressman, especially around this time. We're working on others, including one with Senator Tom Tillis this Friday. And excuse me for 1 second. Sorry. With Senator Tom Tillis, that'll be Friday morning. For registration and more information, you can go to ncrealtors.org/capital, CAPITOL, conversation, like the United States Capitol. And to register, just click on the image in there, and the links will also be provided in this page as well. But these are all great opportunities to hear from legislators, from elected officials, when you aren't able to be in physical presence with them. You also, just to give you all kind of an update on where things stand with the General Assembly, they met over the past couple of days, and they met through many virtual presence capabilities. Their committees were held through Zoom and through YouTube live streams. I have some images that I'll pop up on the page just after this is completed that show kind of what that looked like. In many cases, it was like watching some of the virtual concerts or this Facebook Live that we're doing today, just with a lot more screens, and that comes with challenges. In committee rooms, legislative leadership is able to control background noise and other things that we kind of take for granted in meetings. But when you're online and plugged in various different locations across the state, you can't control if somebody's got their mic wide open and their dogs are barking in the background or their kids are running around in the background. And that's a challenge. That's a challenge for communications. That's a challenge for engagement. And it's just a general complication to the process. They were able to, through virtual presence as well as through social distancing, pass a $1.6 billion relief plan. They passed that on Saturday. And that really helps to provide some monies to allow the state to draw down both federal monies as well as provide additional relief in especially the short term. There are additional plans that the General Assembly is considering. They will be back in a couple weeks, probably in very similar settings to what they were in the previous few days. But we'll continue to monitor that, and you'll see more updates on what was actually included in the relief package later this week in the status update emails. I will give you a preview and also let you know that they did pass, and the governor did sign earlier today, authorization for emergency online notarization, which has been a really key part of what we've been working on. We hoped it would have been accomplished sooner, but due to the way the state law was constructed originally, it could not be done through executive order. We had to wait to get legislative approval. But I'll be glad to answer any questions about that in just a few minutes when I open it up for questions. But at the end of the day, one of the things we really wanted to make sure that each and every one of our members knew is that even though we're not able to be in person, we're not able to sit down and see each of you or to see legislators and elected officials face to face, that we as your advocacy team are still here. We're still working day in and day out on many of the same issues, if not in the same format, but likely in a different format than we were before. All of the key issues that affect the industry are still there and are still important to follow. We've only really added to that list in dealing with the specific nature of the challenges of COVID-19, whether it be the challenges of housing affordability and landlord and tenant issues, or the issues related to the inventory and the process of buying and selling real estate in North Carolina. All of those still remain. We all are still fighting on many of the same things that we were. And so with that, I'm going to open up to questions, see if anybody has anything. I can certainly cover a lot of other technical pieces, but I see a bunch of people jumping on right now, so would love to answer any questions y'all have. Oh, come on. I know somebody on here has a question. All right. While you're thinking about questions, I will also add, right, in addition to the town hall that we have this afternoon with Congressman David Price and the one we have on Friday with Senator Tom Tillis, we have also currently scheduled town halls with Representative Dan Bishop, Representative G.K. Butterfield, Representative Ted Budd, Representative David Rouser, and Representative George Holding. Information about those are available on our website at ncrealtors.org/virtual hill visits. They're also in many of the emails that have come out over the past few days. And also, if you were in any of those representatives' districts, you received a specific email. So I do see a question here from Amy Hedgecock related to what is going on with the courts. Yes. The courts have presented themselves as they can from time to time, presented us with some interesting challenges. As y'all probably saw at the onset of the COVID-19 crisis, the North Carolina court system through the Administrative Office of the Court and the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court shut down court operations. They left some parts of the courts open for criminal matters so that certain parts of the justice system were still operational, but for the most part, civil proceedings have been shut down for, I think we're going on a little bit closer to 50 some odd days right now. And on Friday, there was a notice that closure would be extended. One of the key parts for realtors that has had a significant effect, especially those in property management, is the cessation of eviction proceedings and any summary ejectment proceedings, especially those for non-payment. The NC Realtors team has worked very hard in collaboration and communication with the Property Management Division and others around the state to try to ensure and impress upon the court system and the leadership there the importance of not completely ceasing activities, because there are certainly times where evictions have to occur for health and safety activities and things that really should not be going on, whether it is a crisis or not. And so we were able to make those inroads very early. But as time continues with the courts being closed, as well as with other abatement proceedings for rent at the federal and proposed at the state level, and also these rent strike movements, we know that landlords and property owners who own this rental property are increasingly put into some very awkward and complicated positions. And so, based on the conversation and the notice that went out on Friday, the lobbying team and the government affairs leadership have all been having communications and conversation with the Administrative Office of the Courts. We're expecting to receive some additional guidance later today or first thing in the morning. When we receive that and have an opportunity to digest it, we will absolutely distribute as much as we can and are able to folks in the property management division as well as realtors around the state. And we'll be continuing to look for comment and concerns that you have specifically. It's been extremely helpful. Amy, I'll call you out, especially on here because you submitted this question, to hear from property managers who can give us real world, real issue type experience that we're able to then pass on to the Administrative Office of Courts and to that leadership. Because when we speak about it, we're trying to speak in generality so that it's understanding that this is an issue that touches all parts of the state and all parts of things. But if we're able to point to specific examples and say, this is why, these are the real stories of the real people who are being affected, because we can always bring a very general and very broad perspective, but having that conversation at a detail level is extremely important. So I say all that to then come back to say more is coming, and we'll continue to push it out. The question I see from Matt Allen, the disbursement of the funds prior to recordation. Yes. So the Good Funds Settlement Act, for all realtors on here, you probably know those words and that frame very clearly, and understanding of all that over the past few weeks. I myself have learned a lot more about that than I ever thought I would, because it's not an issue we've really had to deal with a lot in the past couple years. Just kind of as a general overview, that is the requirement that all documents be recorded before fund disbursement can occur. And in normal circumstances, that all kind of works. You go to the closing table, especially in most counties right now, you're able to go to the closing table and record very almost instantaneously through electronic recordation with the Register of Deeds, and so that's never really a question as to when a check can be provided to the parties, because the documents were recorded, and it's pretty clear cut. During COVID-19, as we've seen, many registers of deeds have slowed operations. Some have temporarily closed, though I don't believe at this time there's anybody who is fully closed. But there are still some registers of deeds in North Carolina who don't accept any form of electronic recordation, so that puts anybody at a very complicated position. Now, I will say many of them, those who don't do electronic recordation, have worked on some creative workarounds, drop boxes and that kind of thing. But yeah, the temporary amendment to the Good Fund Settlement Act was approved in the House's in the overarching relief bill. We had to work on a couple technical clarifications there, but it is allowable, and there will be the opportunity, now that the bill has been signed by the governor, for parties to engage in a mutual agreement that if the document cannot be recorded, that funds can still be dispersed in the interim. The specific language we will get out to everybody, and then certainly I can expect some additional comments from the legal team, and if there are ever questions that you have about anything specific to that, or any other issue that has more of a legal flavor than a government affairs flavor, you can always call and email the legal hotline. Will Martin and his team have been working overtime to ensure that y'all have the best and most comprehensive information out there on legal issues, and they've even brought things to us as the government affairs team that we have to then go back to elected officials or to or other attorneys and say, hey, what did you mean, and can we change this, because this makes no sense. So more coming on that, but it has been passed and is moving forward. What other questions do folks have? All right, so in the last few minutes or so, I will just remind you to make sure to always check all NC Realtors communications. As you've seen over the past few weeks, we have ramped that up, as we talked about from the beginning, whether it be status updates, the education roundup, the weekly Realtor rundown, and any other communications that come out. In a normal week, I would also be telling you that the Realtor Advocate is coming out on Friday, but we've put that on a bit of a hiatus to ensure that we're able to advocate and activate the status update as quickly as possible. But we will always continue to find new and innovative ways to engage with realtors and with our members across the state, as we know that information is power, especially in these very difficult and complicated times. I do have a request on here to get a list of which county register of deeds would meet the criteria. Technically, any of them can if they choose to close as a result of COVID-19. There is no specific list. Technically, by the way the legislation is written, is that any of the 100 that any of the 100 registers of deeds can be in this kind of frame of reference as far as the Good Fund Settlement Act, and so it's an open allowance. As I said, I don't believe at this time there are any registers of deeds who are fully closed. So there may be not necessarily any specific need for this legislation, but we wanted to certainly have it if the need arises in the future. It was not allowable, under the statute, and so even if the circumstance arises in the future, this provision would still apply. There is no sunset on the Good Fund Settlement Act allowance. There is a sunset on the Emergency Online Notarization Fund allowance that would sunset in March, though we are hearing and do believe that there will likely be some additional legislation probably proposed in the near future to address online notarization in general, because we know this is an evolving problem, and that we in North Carolina have been a little bit behind some of the curve of our comparative states across the country, and that we still require a wet signature and a wet stamp, even and even in electronic notarization, we still require you to be physically present, which in the days of COVID-19 is certainly not possible. Other questions, other comments or things that y'all are hearing from folks across the state? The other thing that I'll make sure that I also clarify, when we talk about federal advocacy issues, I see a couple folks from the coast have popped up. While certainly from NAR, there's not the normal May meeting push on things like flood insurance, they still are working very hard on those issues. They were fortunate to get an extension in a previous piece of legislation on the National Flood Insurance Program, so that it's extended through the fiscal year, so it would not expire until September. At the same time, there are certainly a lot of conversations going on at the federal level about the industry as a whole to ensure that there aren't additional stopgaps or challenges. In the conversations I've had with NAR folks, they are monitoring almost anything you can think of when it comes to the congressional calendar and the congressional issue list. As we all kind of can assume, in an election year, Congress was likely not going to be doing a whole heck of a lot of work. You don't normally expect a whole bevy of new legislation or very hard fights in an election year when legislators need to be excuse me, out raising money, out campaigning. They tend to not be in session as much. They will certainly this session be in a lot more during the months leading into the election than they probably would have been without the crisis we're currently addressing. I will also say that the advocacy team at NAR is taking a huge step in bringing the virtual Realtor legislative meetings. This is something that I know has been challenging for a lot of them. If you serve on NAR committees, those big meeting rooms that we all were maybe slightly looking forward to at either the Marriott or the Omni or the Sheraton, the Hilton, maybe were a little bit different if you had to be on a Zoom call with all those folks. But they're still opening up a lot of those opportunities. You can go to legislative.realtor for a complete list of all the meetings that are available. A lot of the committee meetings are open and accessible to any member, especially some of the bigger ones. There are some that are closed. But many of those that I believe are closed aren't normally open to general members anyway. Because of the type business they conduct and the confidentiality they have to maintain. You also are going to see beginning, I believe, next week. Some of the general sessions that you would normally have in DC. So they're bringing in folks, the always enjoyable Lawrence Yun, but also some other political figures and other folks from the regulatory side of things at the federal level that will be great to watch and to hear. And you can do so in the comfort of your own home or home office and be able to engage with different pieces of advocacy that way. We will also be soon releasing the schedule of events for the NC Realtors legislative meetings that will be conducted towards the latter part of May and into June. Those were originally scheduled from June 1st through the 3rd here in Raleigh, but they, as we talked about, will be moved virtually. Any other questions? We all are certainly busy, and I want to be respectful of everybody's time here on today's Mobile Monday. Like I said, I will be posting a lot of resources in the Mobile Monday group. Can always jump back on here whenever we need to, and then you can always reach me at spalmer@ncrealtors.org or on social media on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn. In my role in communications, I am on here all the time. All right, so I'm going to conclude today's Mobile Monday by thanking everybody who was able to join us today, and to leave you with the thought that while advocacy during the time of COVID-19 is certainly different and challenging in its own right, we are here to support your issues, your industry, and your clients through our work, and we wish you all a safe day, and I would be remiss as a huge Star Wars fan to wish you a wonderful and happy May the 4th, and so may the 4th be with you. Thanks.